We're going to be talking about crowdfunding, and we've got a good group to cover that topic. From your perspective, to my right, Eric Migicovsky, the CEO of Pebble, which crowdfunded its smartwatch on Kickstarter.
We made a watch.
Yeah. And that was a pretty good experience for you guys, right? Still the biggest crowdfunding project ever on Kickstarter, I think.
Yeah.
To Eric's right, Kate Drane, who's the hardware marketing director at Indiegogo.
Hi, guys.
And to her right is Rob Coneybeer, the co-founder of Shasta Ventures. So we're going to jump right into it. Just talk about sort of some conceptual things in crowdfunding. If you were going to start a hardware crowdfunding project tomorrow, these are the three people who would be most likely to give you the best tips, I think. I think, for starters, what types of products work for crowdfunding and what doesn't? Does anyone have any thoughts on, I have a great idea for, say, some cellular network technology that I want to sell to Verizon and AT&T. Is that going to work on crowdfunding?
One of the ways to think about it is if you're crowdfunding something where you think it'll be a big platform, I think Eric's company, Pebble, is a good example of this. We're investors in Ouya, and that's one where they're building a large gaming developer community. It makes a lot of sense because you want to get out there, have people aware of it, and then the developers, when you're trying to solve this chicken and egg problem of is there going to be a platform out there, are going to be a lot of people using it, when they can look at something like a Pebble watch or an Ouya game system, they know that there's going to be an installed base that they can start to write against before it's out there. So that's pretty interesting.
But remember that Ouya and Pebble both started off as companies that were just trying to make something useful for end users. You can't really assume that you're going to be able to build a platform just because you're starting on a crowdfunding thing. I think that to gamble on solving the chicken and the egg problem with a crowdfunding project, I don't know if that's the be-all and end-all answer. I think that it's a very public way of doing it. If you want to increase the publicity around your product, then it's great. But there are a lot of platforms that have popped up. That's true.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, this is something that I've thought about a bit because being an early investor in Nest, where you have person by person by person makes a decision to decide, that was a circumstance where we didn't want to give any sort of advance notice to others what was coming, what was going on to prevent the competitive activities. And the flip side is I made the mistake of passing on Pebble before you did your Kickstarter campaign. And you went out and you proved that there was actually very large demand for your product. And I think that's one of the strengths. And you were able to really prove out that there was a platform opportunity to be able to bring developers, which I think is a real strength of the crowdfunding opportunity.
So Pebble's successful crowdfunding campaign sort of demonstrated to you that you were wrong when you passed it, right?
I'm wrong a lot. I mean, to be clear,
it pays to be wrong when you're a VC because there's just so many opportunities. Yeah.
But it is interesting because what happens is then he's right, and then it becomes a very expensive valuation.
But what I would say, just from having an Indiegogo view, that using Indiegogo or using a crowdfunding platform as that this is our creating a piece of marketing collateral, and we were just talking about this outside of using it as a marketing vehicle and understanding that is the intention behind it. While yes, fundraising is part of it, marketing is a large part of it as well. And so if you frame it that way and you set out your intention that way, I think that it runs the gamut of the type of business that can benefit from it because you're getting your name out there, you're putting out your story in a concise way where people get to relate to you specifically and they get to know the story behind you. It's like a new investor pitch because you have a 3-minute or less video. You'll make 112% more money if you have a video that's 3 minutes or less. Just a little pro tip for you. And then also you have a concise, this is what we're setting out to do, this is our story, this is our team, this is how you can get involved, this is how we're using the money. So it's really any business can benefit from putting yourself out there. And I would recommend if knowing what your market is, maybe setting your goal for a lower amount so you could set and calibrate your expectations for what you would make from a funding side.
So it's interesting that point about crowdfunding as a marketing vehicle. So how do you then go about executing a successful marketing campaign? I mean, do you need to hire some marketing pro to come in and?
No, not at all. I mean, thinking about a crowdfunding campaign, it's this beautiful page. It's simple. You've got a video and you have a button that says back this project. So marketing on a crowdfunding platform is really about drilling down to what is your product in 3 simple sentences, pretty much, and then creating a video that illustrates that, and making sure that your video supports your product as well as the page, because some people are just not going to be able to watch the video. And I would argue that it's very much about simplicity. You want to figure out why would people be interested in your product or service, and then eloquently explain it in a short enough span for them to keep their attention around, and then figure out how you can convert those people to be supporters of your project. It forced us to think long and hard about what we had been working on watches before. We had made a previous product and company and everything. And going on Kickstarter and creating our Kickstarter campaign forced us to think about why in the world would people around the world buy a smartwatch, pretty much. Up to that point, it had been mainly, I think we were trying to do the platform play a little bit too early, thinking about apps. But at the end of the day, on Kickstarter, it was just, sports and fitness, music control, and notifications.
Right. We talked about this over a year ago. You told me that you had trouble raising VC money. You said, pitching to investors, I don't know how to do that. We have to come up with numbers and financial projections and things that I'm not good at. But when you're pitching on crowdfunding, you told me, it's just showing people how they're going to use this thing and getting them excited about it. Does crowdfunding have this potential for many entrepreneurs to just completely replace seed funding from angels and venture capitalists? I mean, Rob, do you see that as a potential competitor to getting into early stage deals?
One thing I think about when I think about alternative funding is I love to see funding for startups, truly, especially at the seed stage anyways, for people to get started. So anything that provides more access to capital for entrepreneurs, I love to see. So number one. Number two is it's interesting when people think about disruptions to the venture capital business, because you get people in the venture capital business that are always talking about, oh, you should go out and be a disruptor. But the moment that there's something that might be disruptive to your industry, people are like, oh no, that won't work. But I think here, there are pros and cons to it. So the way that I tend to think about it when I look at businesses is fairly neutral, actually, because it can prove that you have a market, but it can also prove that you have a market. And if you prove that there's a market for a business, you can be pretty certain that you'll have competition. And if you prove that there's a market, and then you find that it's a little harder to make than you thought, and you're delayed 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, you can open up the window for other people. So my point is that it's not obvious to do it, because you might prove, because you've done a $200,000 goal and you get to $180,000, it's not that interesting. But you can go the other way, like what Formlabs did with their 3D printer, going into a pretty crowded space, and they raised, $7 or $8 million, and they proved that there was real demand for their printers. So that's how we think about it.
But doesn't that go against the idea of a minimum viable product, though? Like if you're saying don't go on a crowdfunding platform because you want to shield your idea until it's ready, that really goes against the grain for the the standard web startup, which you launch with a launch rock page before it's even out there, just to find out gauge the interest level. I was just going to say that I think in some ways it's good to see people kind of launch projects without worrying about the competitors, because in my opinion, no one's going to kill your startup except for you. People have this gross misunderstanding of massive competitors, basically tracing people, and they're gonna target exactly what you're building. But at the end of the day, no one really cares about your product except for you.
This is coming from the guy who's about to face up against Apple and Samsung and Qualcomm.
Yeah, but I mean, we launched our product a year ago, and we launched it while there were already competitors in the marketplace. Like Motorola already had a watch on the market. Sony Ericsson had been making watches for about 3 or 4 years. No one knew about those, and no one really cares. I mean, at the end of the day, if you make a product that people want, then be proud of it. Don't not show it off.
And one thing that crowdfunding allows you to do, and I would imagine I would want to hear your take about this as well, is that because you have this direct engagement line with your community and with the people who contributed to your success, that they are now a part of your story, and they want to help you. They're like, oh, I was talking with one of our campaigners, and he said that one of the contributors' campaign wrote him an email. It was like, hey, I noticed that you only have an 8-inch wire for these speakers. I think it would be so much more effective if it was twice that length, because then I could do X. He's like, that is an amazing suggestion. Thank you so much. So now it's called the Bob wire, like internally in their company. And so that's one thing from the minimum viable product perspective to keep in mind, is that you have this really rabid fan base who really wants your product and is invested as a not an investor, but that is invested in your success directly. And so, but I would be interested to hear how that has affected your company.
Yeah, how do you even go about cultivating this sort of evangelist among your backers?
It's difficult. I mean, it's a very public platform to work on, as I'm sure you know, and you know, it basically is a crash course in PR and public relations, and I guess managing expectations. We took a stance right from the get-go on our Kickstarter project that we would be as transparent as physically possible on everything except for the ship date. And that was basically a blog post that we wrote back in June 2012, where we said, we want to be open, we want to be transparent, but one of the things that we can't talk about is the exact date that we were going to start to ship. And the reason for that was because the variables that controlled that date were not only immense in terms of the number of variables, but also very interdependent and interlinked. And while we were, doing our best to understand that the sort of math and magic that went into predicting that ship date, we didn't feel confident conveying the exact date that we were projecting along the way. So that was something that we had to learn very quickly.
And this has been pretty common in crowdfunding, at least for hardware across the board, is a lot of missed ship dates, people overestimating their ability to deliver. Rob, is that unique to crowdfunding? You've seen a lot of hardware companies over the years.
The one thing that will happen with hardware if you start a hardware company is it will be late. It will be. You almost have to set a deadline.
And twice as expensive as you thought.
I mean, I've been in the last 7 years, there's been a lot of consumer hardware, but before that I did a lot of communications hardware. And I can't think of a single company I've been involved with that hasn't had some level of delay. But the delay is going to happen, so you almost have to pick the date you're going to be late for up front. So that's one thing that we think about with these companies. I think when you're very public about it, this cuts both ways. It has to fit with your strategy. I think it worked very well for Eric and for Pebble to be public about what they're doing, because a lot of people weren't sure about the category. But there are other areas where it's important for all the news and everything to come out at the point at which the consumer can make a decision. And that's part of what happens with crowdfunding is if you get it right and you hit the seam, the consumer can make a decision. And they can go in and they can feel that there's a scarcity value, which is it's going to go away and they're not going to get this perk or that perk if they don't act. It's always that scarcity, but you have to tie it to the consumer being able to take action. And in my view, the worst place is no man's land. Either do it early, pay for working capital up front, do what Formlabs and Pebble and Ouya did, or go the other way, which is have something that's capital efficient or get some big backers, and then announce the product and have it available to ship within a few weeks of when you announce it. And that's a very different strategy that I think has worked very effectively for Nest, for example.
There's one more category, which is extremely early stage projects where you're just feeling out the idea and seeing it, like people that are raising $10,000, $15,000 to just make circuit boards. I've bought an untold number of circuit boards on Kickstarter because they've just been so immediately accessible. I just really want that circuit board at some point. It'd be cool, $20. And it's just an idea at that point, really.
So one quick thing I want to build on, if we could come back for a second, is this idea of how can you make the most of the crowdfunding platform? And I think so much of it comes back to what Eric was talking about, this idea of marketing, but I put it in slightly more colorful words, and I would say storytelling. It's the idea of storytelling, and it's this idea of a basic story you can tell over and over again. And I think naming is very important here. It should be something that's easy to spell, easy to pronounce, and easy to recall. And Pebble is a perfect example of this. So what happens is you tell a great story, people see the video, they feel great about it, they can have the recall, and then when they put it into social media and they go ahead and they do something, it works for you. And all this stuff is like, you go to Indiegogo, you go and it's like, how do I succeed on Indiegogo? And one of the top things above the fold in Google that'll come up is your fact page. And it's pretty easy to do, but you just have to pay attention to those resources and think about the actual storytelling element of what you're doing.
So you mentioned the video. I see, it seems like almost every crowdfunding project that's successful that I've seen has video attached. Why is that important, and how important is it?
As I mentioned, 112%, you'll raise 112% more money on average if you have a video that's 3 minutes or less. But it's to your point of that, so people contribute to crowdfunding campaigns for one of three reasons. One, because of the person. Either there's a direct connection to that person. Maybe you really like the way that they told the story. They said it in a way that made sense and that was accessible. And you're like, I can recall these three benefits to how this is going to help my life. Two is because of the perk, the thing that you're getting in exchange for a contribution. You really want that watch. And you want to look as awesome as Eric does with his watch on his wrist. And then third is that participation and pride to say that you helped make that happen. And just think of how many people that they get to brag on their social media feeds to be like, holy crap, I just was part of the largest crowdfunding campaign ever. You should be here too. Or help make this happen, help make this possible. And so it's remembering that all of those things are what motivates people and that you want to hit on all three of them to ensure that people really are motivated to action.
One thing about the video that I've found is I looked at a hell of a lot of videos before we shot ours. I looked at the Twine video, which was one of my favorite ones. I looked at a lot of videos that were just filmed in the style of movie trailers that were a lot of fun as well. But with the video, we didn't have any money. But if we had money, we probably would have been lured into the idea of hiring someone to shoot our video for us. And I think that in hindsight, shooting our own video and doing all the editing, doing all the sound work ourselves, forced us to think harder about what our product was and what it means and how best to convey that to people. If we had relied on someone else to do it, I can't even imagine really what we would have made. I mean, we probably would have made a bit of a higher budget. We would have spent more money and it would have looked nicer, but I'm not sure it would have had that core connection to the use cases and core experience built in right into the video. And so my advice for anyone working on a crowdfunding campaign is film it yourself, write the page yourself. Don't rely on, you can't outsource marketing. It's not something that anyone else can really do better for you at the beginning. Maybe later on, possible. But even now, we do most of our marketing and PR ourselves because at the end of the day, like I said before, we're the ones who care. And it's very difficult to pay someone to care more about your product than you do.
And how did you figure out how to do PR and marketing when you didn't have a background in that?
Trial and error. We to film the video, I just borrowed a friend's camera and borrowed a friend's microphone and borrowed some friends, shot the video of them.
I think part of building a campaign is trying to sort of make a cohesive message and kind of distill it down. Do you have any thoughts on how to do that successfully? I would think that some of your best VC pitch meetings have come from entrepreneurs who have distilled that message.
Well, I think it's a measure of not just making us happy and making it simple enough for a VC to understand, but it's, do they understand the importance of that storytelling to every other part of their business? Because if you can distill it down into a simple message, you're going to be able to promote it more effectively. You're going to be able to leverage social media more effectively. You're going to serve your customers better. There's a quote I love from Albert Einstein, which is, if you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand it. And I think that's true for most businesses. They should be very simple to describe. And it also helps with recruiting. You talk to somebody and you want somebody to be able, when they're deciding what to do, when they're talking to their family and friends about what it is, you want them to be able to say very simply what it is they do. So storytelling is really at the core of building a startup in today's world. Yeah,
recruiting is interesting. I remember you mentioned something about recruiting during the campaign while it was still running, and you were getting, your hype was snowballing, and you were racking up money on your Kickstarter page. How did you go about recruiting?
Well, we only had 3 people on our team when we launched. 3 people and 2 interns, so 5 people, but 3 full-time and 2 interns on our team when we launched on Kickstarter. And it was a bit of a shock. Like, obviously, we had been expecting to raise about $100,000 in our campaign, so we knew that we had to scale up relatively quickly. And at that point, I had talked to a lot of my friends who had rapid expansions of their team, and at the end of the day, I decided to just hire a lot of my friends from engineering school because I could trust them from having worked at group projects in the past, and also they had the technical. I was very confident in their technical ability. But I try to think about. We hired about 7 people within the span of a month, and then we didn't hire anyone for about 5 or 6 months after that. And it was kind of a decision that we had to make, which was, do we spend the time? And it does take a lot of time to recruit people, to hire and to interview, and to it's a distraction for the entire team. So we had to it was a bit of a decision that we had to make. Do we build the team first, or would we build the product? And we realized that if we didn't build the product, there would be no team, there would be no company left to build. So we decided to focus on building the product.
And you mentioned when you were doing those recruiting phone calls, at least in those rare instances, you would tell the person to pull up the crowdfunding page on Kickstarter at the start of the phone call. You would go through the interview questions, discuss any concerns, and then at the end you would say,
look at the page.
Refresh the page.
Yeah, those were some pretty powerful recruiting.
There would be an extra $100,000, $200,000
Yeah.
on there to cover their salary and then some. All right, thanks a lot, guys. This was fun.
No time for questions? Or?
I don't think we do. I think everybody's probably hungry for lunch right now.
Okay.
So we'll let you guys
we'll
go.
be around
Thanks.
for questions.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.